Hello everyone, it's Mark. I am the Sanderson collector, and it's time for me to fanboy all over Brandon. This week it's going to be Fanderson Week, Beta Reading and Gamer Reading, Part 2. First, I'd just like to go ahead and apologize for the sound quality this week. I managed to leave my microphone at the office where I was recording a documentation video for them, so I'm just having to go back to my phone microphone for the audio. Hopefully it's still okay. The only news item I have for today is that yesterday I recorded about 3 hours of video for the foreign language spotlight on the Spanish editions, and so that's going to take me a little while to edit, but once I get that done, expect to see probably 4 or 5 videos, maybe even more, on the Spanish language editions. I'm really excited to get that video edited and post those because there was a lot of good stuff in there. I had 2 people on who live in Spain and speak Spanish and are huge Sanderson fans and have a lot of the editions, and I got a lot of good information from them, so look forward to those in the coming weeks. And without further ado, let's get into it. Today I'm going to be talking about my personal experiences and how it feels to be a beta and gamma reader for Brandon. If you want to know what the beta and gamma reading process is and how it works, go check out the video which I will link in the description, which I did last month about that part of the process. The way beta and gamma reading feels varies from book to book. The roughest book that I have done a beta read for was Oathbringer, and that is simply because the book is so large. When we did the beta read for Oathbringer, we got the book one part at a time, a couple weeks to a month apart. So we got part 1 and got to beta read it, and then we got part 2 with the, I believe, interludes between part 1 and part 2 with it, and got to beta read that, and then a month later we get the interludes between part 2 and part 3 and the rest of part 3 and get to beta read it, and then we have to wait another month right at the end of part 3 with that big cliffhanger before we get the interludes and part 4 and so on. So that was kind of brutal, especially the cliffhanger at the end of part 3. If you've read Oathbringer, you know what I'm talking about. And it was especially brutal just because of the amount of work that we all had to do on it. When we do our beta read comments, they're put into a spreadsheet where we put the quote from the book and our comments on it, and you can put a line below it in the spreadsheet where you reply to someone else's comment, or you can just +1 the comment if you really agree with what they're saying, and so on. And Oathbringer, the initial draft was something like 500,000 words long. It was a lot to read, and we made more words in comments on that document than there are in that draft of the book. We stopped counting when we got over 500,000 words in comments. It probably ended up being around 600,000 or something, and I went through and read most of those as I was doing my read to make sure that I wasn't saying the same thing that someone else was, or if I had a thought on something they said, like they thought that this was particularly surprising, and I'm like, no, that wasn't surprising to me, then I'd leave that as a reply to their comment. Oathbringer, because it was stretched out like that, and there was so much to read and so many comments to read, basically took up my weekends for probably 3 months, and it was absolutely exhausting. I was glad when that beta read was over because it meant I had some free time back and I could spend my free time thinking about, well, I mean, I still think about Sanderson stuff, but stuff other than just this one particular book. The regular beta reads, the other ones that I've done, have been a lot more relaxed. For example, I did a beta read for Calamity. That was the first book that I beta read, and we got the whole book at once. And I was actually one of the first people to get through the entire book, so I didn't have a lot of other people's comments to look at while I was going through my initial read. What I actually did with Calamity was go through maybe the first 10 or so chapters one day, and then decide to take the next day off of work and stay home. I spent the entire day, basically start to finish, doing the beta read for Calamity and making my comments. And since I was the first person through some of the chapters, it was a lot less exhausting, and it was really exhilarating to be the first person to go through those chapters. Most of the other beta reads have been somewhere in between in terms of how taxing they are and how long they take me to do, but I always enjoy them, and It's always an incredibly rewarding process to know that, even if just one comment that you make in the book fixes something or makes something better in the final product, that you have contributed to making a Brandon Sanderson book better, is just absolutely such an amazing feeling, and I love it. And that's really why I do the beta reading. The only other really unique beta read that I've done was Mistborn Secret History, which was a very hush-hush book, and Brandon actually just wrote a rough draft of this and sent it to us as the alpha readers. Normally it goes through his writing group and then Peter and then his editor at the publisher before it gets to us as beta readers, so it's gotten a certain level of polish before we see it. But for Mistborn Secret History, because it was on such a tight schedule, instead we got it and it was in a very rough form, and so it was a little more difficult to read, and we had more comments, and things actually ended up changing kind of significantly between parts of the first draft and the final version that came out. And it was also a little more nerve-wracking because we had to make sure that we didn't say anything about the beta read to anyone who was not in the beta read, because the book was such top secret that nobody else got told about it before it came out. One of the most interesting parts about being a beta reader and having the beta version of the book is comparing the beta version to the final version and seeing what Brandon changes and how he changes it. I am constantly amazed by how this man can fix even the largest seeming problems in a book just by changing a couple of sentences here, a couple of sentences there, a word here, and suddenly everything is much better. And it's just amazing to me that he can make such small seeming revisions that have such a big impact on the books. This has been inspiring for me in my own writing and helpful in teaching me how to revise. And so I also really appreciate getting to see the process of Brandon's writing because of how helpful it is to me as a writer. And just to give you all a quick overview of what I do when I'm beta reading a book is I go through and take the chapter, and I'm reading it digitally because the book isn't printed yet. We just have basically a Word document of what the beta version of the book is, and I go through and I read it on my computer. I have a piece of paper in front of me and a pen, and I will just take my pen and scribble down notes, stream of consciousness thoughts on the book essentially as I'm going through it. And then once I finish each chapter, before I move on to the next chapter, I stop, I go to the spreadsheet, I go through my stream of consciousness thoughts and turn them into coherent reactions and impressions about the book and put them into the spreadsheet, as well as going through and reading other people's comments about that chapter. It's very important that I do this before I get to future chapters because certain character motivations or foreshadowing and whatnot are impacted by things in future chapters, and it's important to get the reader's reaction as they're in that chapter before they get to the next chapter. And so I always make sure I go and enter all these comments before I get to the next chapter. And that's basically the entire process for beta reading. Gamma reading, the proofreading step, is a completely different experience. There's a lot less pressure to get through the entire book, especially if you've already read the book in the beta read, although I still like to go through just to compare and to make sure I know what's in the final book and what's not, because it can be confusing when little things change between the versions. But the gamma read is the one that really clicks for me as a person because that's how my mind works. I like to dig into the nitty-gritty details, the tiny little things, find any imperfections that I can and fix them to make it absolutely perfect. I like doing this in a lot of aspects of life, and being able to apply this to Brandon's books is just totally awesome. I mean, I get to make comments saying this period is italicized when it shouldn't be, and get that changed in the book, which I bet a lot of people would think is completely insane, and I think is totally cool, so I love this part of the process. Now, my process for gamma reading is that I tend to get caught up reading the story. I'm a reader. I love the books. But if I get caught up in the story, I'm not looking for the little details and doing the gamma read that I'm supposed to be doing. And so what I do is I read backwards one paragraph at a time, starting at the end of the book. I will read one paragraph and I'll read it out loud to myself, usually on screen because we're sent a PDF file of the book, and I'll track my mouse pointer over the words as I read them out loud, read one paragraph, and then I'll go up to the previous paragraph and do the same thing. And then the previous paragraph and do the same thing. And whenever I find something that I think is a mistake, I'll go note it in the spreadsheet. If I'm not sure about the grammar, I've got one or two friends that I can ask who are really good at this that I double check before I put it in the spreadsheet to make sure I'm not wasting Peter's time with my corrections. And, this is a really slow process. I'll get through maybe 10 pages in an hour if I'm concentrating heavily, so I don't always get through the entire book, but I'm okay with that because we have an entire team that jumps in for every single gamma read, because basically everyone is invited at this point from the beta reading group, and we all jump in, we do our gamma read, everyone jumps around to different parts of the book, and everything gets a lot of eyes on it, so I'm not as worried if I personally don't get to see the entire thing at this stage. And that's everything for the gamma reading step. Just a quick rundown of the books that I have been a beta and gamma reader for. I have been on the beta and gamma reading team for Calamity, Mistborn Secret History, Edge Dancer, Oathbringer, and the Third Legion novella. Additionally, I have been on the gamma reading team, but not the beta reading team, for a couple other books. For example, Arcanum Unbounded. While I initially did the beta read on Edge Dancer, I did the gamma read for the full book, including the stories that I was not a beta reader for. I was a gamma reader for Alcatraz 5, Alcatraz versus the Dark Talent. I was a gamma reader for Skyward, but not a beta reader. And I was on the gamma read for the reissue of The Rhythmatist that is going to come out in November of this year. And last but not least, I am currently doing a gamma read, which is why I didn't get any more videos edited this weekend, for at least the first half of the 10th anniversary edition of Warbreaker, which is absolutely gorgeous, by the way. I can't really say anything more about it, but it's one that you absolutely should be looking forward to because it is awesome. And I'm in the middle of gamma reading that right now, so I'm going to go and keep reading that, and I'll see y'all next week. Until then, happy collecting.